Dark thoughts rarely arrive like thunder. They slip in quietly, whispering that you are not enough, that the world is heavy, that tomorrow will only bring more of the same. You try to push them aside, distract yourself, or pretend they're not there, but they return, stronger and sharper. Most people think peace comes when the storm finally passes. The Stoics knew better. They believed peace is found in the middle of the storm, by facing those thoughts head-on, stripping away their disguise and standing firm with reason. How did they do it? And how can we? Dark thoughts come in many forms. Sometimes they are sharp, like anger flaring at a careless word. Other times they are heavy, like the dull ache of self-doubt or the endless churn of worry about what might happen tomorrow. To the Stoics, these thoughts were not foreign invaders. They were part of the human mind, natural but dangerous when left unexamined. Seneca once wrote of his own struggles with anxiety during exile, admitting that even philosophers were not immune to fear and despair. What set the Stoics apart was not the absence of darkness, but their way of meeting it. Instead of treating these thoughts as enemies to be destroyed, they regarded them as signals, indicators of what the mind was clinging to or what it misunderstood. In a world that often encourages escape through distraction, pleasure, or denial, the Stoics chose clarity. They asked, what is this thought? Where does it come from? And what power does it truly have? By naming the shadow, they reduced its size. By facing it, they robbed it of its hidden strength. Their method was not about suppressing what we feel, but about seeing clearly, and in that clarity, finding a kind of freedom. The Stoics built their strength on a simple but powerful division: what is within our control and what is not. At first glance, it sounds almost too simple, but this single distinction reshaped how they faced dark thoughts. Fear grows when we try to control what lies beyond our reach: other people's opinions, the turning of fortune, the certainty of tomorrow. Anxiety feeds on the illusion that if we think hard enough, we can bend the world to our will. But Epictetus reminded his students that our power lies only in our choices, our judgments, our actions, our responses. Everything else belongs to chance, to nature, or to God. Imagine a storm forming in the sky. You cannot stop the clouds from gathering, nor can you command the rain to cease. But you can choose whether to stand calmly beneath it with a cloak, or to curse the heavens in vain. Dark thoughts, too, are part of life's weather. They will come, they will pass. The question is not whether they appear, but whether we mistake them for reality or see them as passing impressions. By focusing only on what belongs to us, the way we meet each moment, the Stoics stripped away much of the mind's torment. They accepted that fate could not be mastered, but the self could. In that acceptance, peace began to grow. When a shadow lingers in the mind, it often grows larger because it has no name. The Stoics understood this well. They practiced the art of calling each thought what it truly was, stripping away its disguise. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, often reminded himself, "You are just an impression, not the truth." By speaking to his own thoughts in this way, he reduced their weight. A fear was no longer a prophecy, but simply a passing picture in the mind. An insult was no longer a wound, but a sound carried through the air. Modern science has confirmed this simple wisdom. Labeling a thought, saying to yourself, "This is fear," or "This is anger," diminishes its grip. Instead of being swallowed by the feeling, you begin to observe it. And the moment you become the observer, you are freer. Imagine walking through a fog. At first, all you see is haze, but once you recognize the shapes hidden inside it, trees, stones, paths, the fog loses its mystery. The Stoics used the same approach with the fog of the mind. They refused to let vague impressions rule them. By naming what arose within, they regained sight of where they were going. Clarity became their shield and truth their guide. Fear is one of the darkest voices the mind can produce, and for many it becomes an enemy to run from. The Stoics chose a different path. They treated fear as a teacher. Epictetus reminded his students, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinion of them." In other words, fear is rarely about the event itself, but about the meaning we give it. The fear of losing wealth is not about coins or property, but about what we believe wealth says about us. The fear of death is not about the end itself, but about the stories we attach to it, unfinished business, forgotten legacy, or the unknown beyond. To the Stoics, these dark thoughts were signals pointing to what we value, and sometimes to what we cling to too tightly. Instead of cursing fear, they asked, "What is this teaching me about myself?" Seneca once wrote that fear exposes attachment. If you fear poverty, it shows your dependence on wealth. If you fear insult, it reveals your hunger for approval. With this perspective, fear became less of a curse and more of a mirror. In its reflection, you could see the chains you had tied around your own soul, and when you could see them, you could begin to loosen them. The Stoics practiced an exercise called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. At first, it sounds grim, imagining all the misfortunes that could happen, but to them, it was not about drowning in dread. It was about robbing fear of its surprise. Seneca advised his readers to rehearse poverty, to picture themselves stripped of wealth, eating coarse bread, sleeping on the ground. By doing so, he showed that what we fear is often less terrible than we imagine. When you face misfortune in the mind, calmly and deliberately, it loses its sharpness. The unknown is always heavier than the known. By turning shadows into shapes, Stoics prepared themselves to remain steady when hardship came. Marcus Aurelius wrote often of death, sickness, and betrayal, not because he wished them upon himself, but because he knew they belonged to life. To ignore them was to remain fragile. To face them was to become strong. This practice is as useful now as it was then. Before an important meeting, you can imagine failure and see that even if it comes, life continues. Before a journey, you can imagine delays, accidents, or discomfort and realize that your peace does not have to vanish with them. By practicing the worst in thought, the Stoics freed themselves to live more lightly in reality. Pain and hardship are unavoidable, but the Stoics warned against making them larger than they are by fusing our identity with them. There is a difference between feeling sorrow and becoming sorrow, between experiencing hardship and being consumed by it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Detachment for the Stoics was not indifference or coldness. It was perspective, the ability to stand back and see that you are more than the moment you are in. When an insult comes, the wound is not in your soul, but only in the air that carried the words. When fortune changes, it is not your essence that is diminished, but your circumstances. To remain attached is to let external events dictate your inner life. To detach is to reclaim that life. Imagine a man standing in a river. The current pulls against him, but he chooses not to struggle against every drop of water. Instead, he plants his feet firmly and allows the flow to pass. This is Stoic detachment, letting the flow of life move without being swept away by it. It does not remove pain, but it prevents pain from becoming your master. By keeping this distance, the Stoics created a space where calm could survive even in the midst of turmoil. The Stoics believed that reason was the strongest weapon against the storms of the mind. When dark thoughts rise, they often carry exaggeration and distortion. They whisper that a mistake is the end of everything, that one loss defines your worth, that tomorrow will only bring ruin. Left unchecked, these thoughts grow like fire, fed by wind. Reason is the tool that cuts through this chaos. Epictetus taught his students to question each impression. Is this thought true? Is it useful? Does it belong to what is within my control? By placing thoughts under examination, they stripped away their false power. Consider the fear of death, one of humanity's oldest terrors. Through reason, the Stoics asked, if death is natural, why should it be evil? If it comes to all, why should I treat it as misfortune? By reframing the fear, they turned what once brought dread into something neutral, even peaceful. This same method applies to the smaller storms of life. A harsh word from another can be questioned. Does it truly define me, or is it only their judgment? A failure at work can be reframed. Is this proof of my inadequacy, or simply an opportunity to learn? The Stoics knew the mind left alone will run wild, but reason can harness it. Like a gardener pruning tangled vines, reason clears space for calm and order to grow. Marcus Aurelius never intended his meditations to be published. They were notes to himself, reminders in the quiet hours of night and dawn. Yet in those private words lies one of the most powerful Stoic practices: journaling. Writing is a way of holding a mirror to the mind. Dark thoughts thrive in silence where they swirl and multiply, but when put onto paper, they lose much of their grip. The Stoics used writing not as decoration, but as therapy. To write down a fear is to see it clearly. To write down anger is to separate yourself from it, observing it like a passing storm. The act itself creates distance. Once a thought is on the page, you can question it, test it, and even replace it with reason. Seneca often wrote letters to friends, not only to advise, but to steady his own mind. Through writing, he organized his fears into lessons. Today, the practice is no less powerful. Sitting quietly with a notebook, you can spill out the worries that crowd your chest. Then you can respond to them with the calm voice of reason, just as the Stoics did. In doing so, the battle moves from vague unease to something you can see, examine, and transform. Journaling turns the invisible into the visible, and in that clarity, peace begins to take root. For the Stoics, true peace did not come from comfort or success, but from virtue. Virtue was the compass that guided their thoughts and actions: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These four were the roots of a life well lived, and everything else, wealth, health, reputation, was secondary. Dark thoughts often gain power when life feels aimless, or when we measure ourselves by unstable things. If your worth depends on riches, every loss threatens your peace. If your worth depends on praise, every insult shakes your ground. But when your worth is anchored in virtue, nothing outside can destroy it. Epictetus, once a slave, lived with poverty and hardship, yet he taught that freedom belongs to the man who governs his own soul. No master could strip him of courage, no chain could bind his pursuit of wisdom. In this, he was freer than many who called themselves kings. Virtue gave the Stoics something unshakable to hold on to, something that no dark thought could reach. Seneca described it as an inner fortress. Once you commit yourself to virtue, the storms outside can batter the walls, but the core remains firm. To live by virtue is to replace confusion with direction, to turn despair into discipline. When life bends under the weight of sorrow, virtue becomes the straight path that steadies the soul. Few thoughts weigh heavier on the human mind than death. It is the shadow behind all fears, the silence that follows every plan, the certainty no one can avoid. For many, the mere thought of mortality breeds dread, a darkness that colors every joy with anxiety. The Stoics did not run from this thought. They faced it daily. Seneca wrote, "He who has learned to die has unlearned to be a slave." To meditate on death was not morbid obsession but liberation. By accepting death as natural, they stripped it of its terror. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that death is simply a return to the elements, as natural as leaves falling from a tree or smoke rising into the air. When seen this way, death loses its cruelty and becomes a part of the order of things. By bringing mortality to mind, the Stoics found clarity. Life became lighter, because nothing was guaranteed beyond the present. Gratitude sharpened, because each day was understood as a gift, not an entitlement. Fear lessened, because what we cannot avoid no longer needed to be resisted. In their calm acceptance, the Stoics discovered that remembering death was not about dwelling on endings, but about living more freely, with nothing left to cling to except the present moment itself. The Stoics often looked to nature as their teacher. They believed that to live in harmony with the universe was to live with peace. When Marcus Aurelius gazed at the stars, he reminded himself of the vast order that moved beyond his small troubles. Rivers flow, seasons change, trees shed leaves and bloom again. These patterns reveal that loss and renewal are not accidents, but the way of all things. To see this is to loosen the grip of despair. When dark thoughts arise, they often carry the illusion that we are singled out, that our suffering is unique and unbearable. But nature whispers otherwise. Storms pass, nights end, winters give way to spring. In the grand cycle, your burden is part of a greater rhythm. The Stoics encouraged us to step outside when the mind grows restless. Look at the horizon, at the sea, at the endless sky. These sights remind us that life is wider than our private struggles. By aligning ourselves with this natural order, we begin to see that our pains, while real, are not final. They are seasons of the soul, meant to move and change. To live with nature is to live with perspective, and in that perspective, peace finds its place. Dark thoughts grow strongest when carried alone. The Stoics understood the importance of community, of fellowship with others who shared the pursuit of wisdom. Musonius Rufus taught that philosophy was not something hidden in books, but something lived together, to speak openly, to share burdens, to remind one another of reason. These were acts of strength. Even Marcus Aurelius, an emperor surrounded by power and solitude, found comfort in the memory of his teachers and companions. He wrote of their virtues, holding them as guiding lights in his own darkness. Seneca often exchanged letters with Lucilius, not only to instruct but to encourage, as much for himself as for his friend. For the Stoics, friendship was a form of medicine, a way to steady the mind when it faltered. Isolation magnifies despair, but fellowship disperses it. In our own lives, speaking of our struggles, even quietly to one trusted soul, can break the hold of dark thoughts. It reminds us that we are not alone in our weakness, that others have walked the same paths and endured. The Stoics knew that reason is stronger when reinforced by companionship, and courage is greater when shared. By seeking fellowship, we do not escape our burdens, but we learn to carry them more lightly. The Stoics did not treat peace as something won once and kept forever. They saw it as a discipline, renewed daily through practice. Just as a soldier sharpens his blade each morning, the mind must be trained to meet the day with steadiness. Marcus Aurelius often began his mornings by reminding himself of the challenges ahead, people who would be selfish, ungrateful, or cruel, and by preparing his heart not to be surprised or angered by them. In the evenings he reviewed his actions, asking where he lived according to reason and where he fell short. Seneca advised that each night we sit in judgment of ourselves, not with harshness but with honesty, correcting the day's errors like a teacher guiding a student. This rhythm of morning preparation and evening reflection formed the backbone of Stoic strength. They did not wait for dark thoughts to strike before resisting them. They trained daily, like athletes of the mind, and in this training they became resilient. The storms of fortune might shake their lives, but their discipline held them steady. Peace, for the Stoics, was not a gift but a habit, built one day at a time. By small, consistent acts, writing, reflecting, choosing reason over impulse, they forged an inner strength no darkness could easily break. The heart of Stoicism is not the absence of dark thoughts, but the mastery of them. The Stoics knew that no matter how much one practiced, fear, doubt, and sorrow would still return, but they no longer had to rule the soul. Peace was not the silence of the mind, but the ability to remain steady even while shadows moved within it. Marcus Aurelius faced wars, betrayal, and illness, yet he wrote of calm, reminding himself that the mind is its own place. He could not control the chaos of the empire, but he could shape his response to it. This is the climax of Stoic wisdom, realizing that inner freedom is possible in every circumstance. Darkness will come, but it does not define you. Thoughts may whisper, but they need not command. By practicing control, reason, detachment, virtue, and daily discipline, the Stoics built a fortress within themselves. The storms outside could rage, but within they found calm waters. The lesson is simple yet profound. Peace is not waiting for the world to quiet down. It is learning to quiet the mind in the middle of the noise. Once you see this truth, the power of dark thoughts begins to fade, and you stand freer than before. The Stoics left behind not a promise of a life without hardship, but a path to walk through hardship with dignity and calm. They showed that dark thoughts are not a sign of weakness, but a part of being human. What matters is how we respond. By separating what is within our control from what is not, we stop wasting energy on the impossible. By naming our thoughts, we see them clearly and refuse to be ruled by illusions. By treating fear as a teacher, rehearsing misfortune, and practicing detachment, we turn suffering into preparation. Through reason, journaling, and the pursuit of virtue, we strengthen the mind against despair. By accepting mortality, we loosen fear's grip and live more freely. By walking with nature, by leaning on fellowship, by holding to daily discipline, we build resilience that endures. These are not abstract lessons buried in old books. They are living tools, still sharp today. Dark thoughts will come as they came to Marcus, to Seneca, to Epictetus, but we are not powerless. Within us lies the same capacity for clarity and strength. The Stoics remind us that while the world may shake, the mind can remain still, and even in shadows, we can choose the light. If this lesson brought you clarity, watch the next video to discover how the Stoics turned pain itself into a source of strength.